My name is Kimberly Kay. I'm the Director of Operations and Editorial Development for the Legal Insurrection Foundation, where I have worked since Professor Jacobson and I launched it 3 years ago. And prior to that, I worked with Professor Jacobson for 5 years on the Legal Insurrection blog. So this is one of the things that we love to do. We love to host these webinars where we can bring really good experts to you who can speak much better to some of these things than we can. And we love to also give you an opportunity to meet some people that you might not otherwise know and learn some things in more depth. So I'm really excited about this particular panel. It's a little bit off the beaten path for us in that we typically deal with education on educational subjects or things pertaining to our work at the foundation. But I think this is just as important, if not more important, than a lot of what we have done so far. And that's how to be prepared. And just so we're all clear how we are approaching this, we're not afraid by any means, but it is wisdom to take precautions and to be prepared for whatever may come. And I think I was joking with a friend the other day. I know I used to tease my granny who lived through the Depression and her Depression coffee and how you could read a newspaper through her coffee because she would use the same grounds, I think, probably for a week. And how the legacy that our kids are going to tell us how, you know, we hoarded toilet paper after the pandemic. You know, it's like grandma always had hordes of toilet paper because she was so afraid she was going to run out. And so anyway, for whatever reason that you're here, I think this is going to be tremendously beneficial. I'm really looking forward to hearing from Lisa, who runs the site, The Survival Mom. She also has a fantastic book, which I have been reading. If you have not purchased it yet, I highly recommend it. It's just a great way to break down preparedness in a way that's not overwhelming, because I'm sure I'm not the only one. When I first started seriously considering the fact that it is me and only me who is responsible for taking care of my small children, that I started digging into how to be prepared, and it was just a flood of information. And where do you even begin? And one of the things I so love about Lisa's information and what she's going to share tonight, it's just a very practical way to begin in all areas of life, and then you can build from there. So real quickly, a couple housekeeping things. I see everyone, we have quite a few people in the chat. Please feel free to engage with one another. I will be engaging with you there as well. If you have questions, so we have the chat function and we also have the Q&A function. If you have a question, please put it in the Q&A section. As the event goes on, I'll be monitoring that, and we will get to as many questions as we can live. So if we don't get to your questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Before I hand this over to Professor Jacobson, I do want to mention too that our programming is always free. And so this is a shameless fundraising pitch. I will drop our link along with the links to all of Lisa's work and where you can find her blog and her book and all of that into the chat section. If you appreciate the work that we're doing, please consider a donation. Even $5 makes a huge difference. We run a tremendously lean operation. And we put every single penny we possibly can back into programming, back into research, so that, you know, our work has legs and we can help people out. That's really our goal in everything that we do. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the baton to Professor Jacobson, who will say a few words, and then we'll get to Lisa's presentation this evening. And I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. We appreciate you, and we're so glad that you're here.
Great. Thank you, Kimberly. And thank you, Lisa, for joining us. It's so wonderful to have somebody who's been thinking about this a lot longer than I have. I'm about a year into thinking about this. So I'm a newcomer. And as many of the readers will know, I began to focus on this during the pandemic, and the fact that our supply chains, without a nuclear war, without the electric grid going down, really without any external events, proved to be so fragile that so many of our key electronic and other components came from China. We're now finding out that fertilizer components come from Russia. This just-in-time production methodology has made us all very exposed, plus the electric grid being strained. So I began to think about this. I've written about it, and I came to the conclusion that these preppers, the people I always used to think about, oh, these crazy preppers, you know, preparing for the end of the world. Well, maybe they're not so crazy. Maybe they're just a little early, okay? And that's the way I look at it. I would rather be early at this stage than late. And that's why I began to think about this, write about it, and now we're putting on this program. Just as a matter of managing expectations, Lisa is going to talk about a lot of different things, and then one of the components she'll talk about is security, but this is not a firearms course, okay? We're not going to tell you whether to carry a firearm or which one to do. Maybe we'll do that in a later program, but just to manage expectations, that's not what tonight is about. It's about a more holistic approach to prepping that Lisa has pioneered and really is the authority on. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa, and I am anxiously awaiting this presentation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Jacobson and Kimberly. I was delighted to be invited to be here with all of you tonight. And on Twitter, I have actually followed Legal Insurrection for some time. So your name and your cause was not exactly new to me. And maybe Survival Mom isn't new to your readers and everyone who is here with us tonight. I wanted just to introduce myself really quickly. Professor Jacobson referred to me as a pioneer, and I sure didn't start out on this journey thinking that I would be a pioneer of anything at all. Honestly, I just knew that I was a mom at the time of 2 children, ages about maybe 7 and 9. And I knew that I was worried. I knew I was a little bit scared around the edges when I saw how back in the end of 2008 and into 2009, that's when I first got into prepping. Didn't even know what prepping was. I came from a solid, middle-class suburban household, with a mom, her emergency supply was a packet of a dozen or so lip glosses in her purse and maybe some Kleenex tissues. That was the extent of, prepping. And as I got into this, though, my goal, really from my heart, was what could I do to protect my family and provide for them in a time of real difficulty? And back in that time frame, in fact, how many of you, just over in chat, I'm interested, just type in yes or no, how many of you kind of started prepping or learned about prepping, maybe thought you should prep back in 2009 and 2010? I'd be really interested to see how many of you kind of that caught your attention at the same time as it did me. I knew there had to be a way that I could keep my family safe along with my husband. And then if the very worst happened, if we lost our home, if our business went bankrupt, what would we do then? So my research led me into what I call the realm of the doomers, survivalism, hardcore stuff, bug out properties. One day my husband came home and I was in my pajamas. This was long before the era of Zoom. I was in my pajamas and I had been frozen in fear all day long. And I was on a site called Survival Blog, and I was researching where we could move, where our home would be safe from rifle fire up to X thousand, number of yards. And my husband was just like, Lisa, get a grip. And I knew that there had to be a different way. There had to be a different way that as a family and along with our loved ones and extended family, that we really could prepare for whatever came. And so I learned and I gleaned from anything and everything that I possibly could. And one night I was thinking about all this, and just the phrase survival mom popped into my head. I had never owned a website. I didn't even really know what blogging was. But by the time my husband came home from work the next day, somehow I figured out to go to GoDaddy, buy thesurvivalmom.com, and I was on my way. And that was over 13 years ago now. So after 13 years, multiple hurricanes, we now live kind of in the southwest area of Texas, experiencing droughts and floods, more floods in my town than I could even list. 13 years of homeschooling. I'm living proof that you really can be prepared for the everyday emergencies that come along, the natural disasters, the heat waves, and so on, and as well as worst case scenarios. It doesn't matter where you live, you really can take steps, practical steps, now to do that. So tonight we're going to be taking a really practical look at this. And as I go to my first slide here, this is my book. I was so proud of this. I'd never written a book before. I always had wanted to. It's available on Amazon. You can buy it used, you know, for a lot less. You get the Kindle version. And I also, it has my website here, thesurvivalmom.com. And so that is where it all began. But remember how you felt in the spring of 2020 when overnight the world, literally the world changed. A lot of times in prepper circles, we will use the acronym TEOTWAWKI. TEOTWAWKI, the end of the world as we know it. And sometimes when people hear that, they think it's nuclear war. They think it's, you know, some economic collapse. But really, honestly, now, 2.5 years later, we know that really the world as we knew it in January 2020, our world changed. Everything is different. And now we're hearing rumbles of more, you know, schools cracking down on required vaccinations and required face masks, and the COVID continues and it's morphing into one thing after another. So the world really did change while we weren't even looking. We were expecting something else. Things changed. The toilet paper shortages, we all remember those fondly, and Purell, Clorox, food shortages. Wasn't it astonishing to go to grocery stores and just see empty shelves everywhere? I live in hurricane country, and that does happen in the 2 or 3 days leading up to hurricanes. Interestingly, the chip aisle. The chip aisle is always empty, along with bread, milk, and eggs. But the empty shelves were everywhere, and there was panic. People didn't know what to think. They didn't know who to believe. Information and confusing information. It was really coming at us in a flood, wasn't it? And then the businesses started closing. Schools started closing. Families had to figure out how, if we have a 2-parent income, how does that work with mom and dad working and now the kids are at home? What do we do? A lot of conveniences were closed down and streets were silent. Do you remember that? I remember. My husband and I would go out bike riding every day, and it was eerie just to see no one on the streets where we live. And we felt suddenly vulnerable and uncertain. And I think right then, a lot of people, if they had never thought about prepping, they realized, Professor Jacobson mentioned this, aha, maybe there's a way for us to prepare. Maybe we should have been prepared for this, but we didn't know what to do. So it really is time now to consider what you should prepare for first. You can't prepare for everything. So where you live right now, I mean, it's still hurricane season for what, another 3 months or so? Phoenix is having some outlandish storms. They're right in the middle of the desert where I used to live. We're seeing just extreme climate, whether it's climate change or whatever it is. We're seeing different extremes, droughts, and so on. And then consider, and we're going to talk about this tonight, how you should prepare. You don't want, now is not the time to waste money, and now is not the time to go down rabbit trails. We're going to focus on tonight preparing your home base. And I'll explain why in just a moment. And as I go, you might want to, if you're not taking notes yet, you may want to start, make a plan. And I talk a lot about the 3-list system. And this helps you narrow down the most necessary things to do, to buy, to learn. I know that in Doomsday Preppers, it seemed as though the preppers there and a lot of survival sites talk a lot about just buying, buying 6 months worth of freeze-dried food. And someone might claim that, here's the bare minimum. And you look at that list and it's thousands and thousands of dollars, and maybe even relocating to Idaho, it's always Idaho. So the 3-list plan really helps you determine priorities. Keep the list with you. If you're at a yard sale, an estate sale, if you go to a secondhand store, you may find just what you need at a fraction of the cost if you were to buy it new or from REI, as I discovered. Write out your plan so all your decisions are on paper. I'll explain a bit about that in just a moment. And you know what? It's important to talk about your plan. Talk about it with your spouse, people that live in your household. My children were really young when we started this, and we didn't come at them and say, the world is going to end, and so we're grinding wheat and we're doing, stocking up on, hundreds of jars of marinara or whatever. But we didn't have to really tell them, why we were doing it. It was just common sense. We want to have a little bit of extra food. It's just nice. If we need an extra jar of peanut butter, there it is. And we explain it to our kids just in very low key terms. As they have gotten older, and they're now 20 and 23, they have a full understanding of why we do what we do. Tonight, I'm going to teach you my system, what I call the 8 S's. And it's simplistic. It's not really marketable, the 8 S's. I don't really have a logo for it or anything like that, but it's effective and it's really helpful. But what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to give you just a cookie cutter, kind of a rubber stamp cookie cutter kind of thing of exactly what you should do, what you have to have on hand. Buy 20 cans of tuna, 20 cans of beef stew, 20 cans of chili, and 50 pounds of rice, and you're all set. That doesn't suit everybody. And I am really conscious that every household is just a little bit different. So your household, you may live by yourself, or you may be retired along with your husband or wife. You might have a household of little kids and you're trying to be a stay-at-home mom or stay-at-home parent or homeschooling. Maybe you're taking care of the grandkids. Every household is different. And that is why taking this framework I'm going to teach you, you can apply it to your home. You can apply it to an apartment. You could apply it to a mobile home, or you could apply it to the emergency kit that you want to keep in your car. It really is that practical. So I have found that it's actually better to learn a system and then apply it and customize it as you go, making the decisions that make sense to you and your household, the health, mobility, income. You don't want to waste a lot of money unnecessarily. So without further ado, these are the 8 S's. And once you're finished with these categories, or once you're familiar with these categories, you can apply them in many, many different ways. So really briefly, you can see them here: sanitation, sustenance, sanity, shelter, security, seasonal, seasonal concerns, and then also strength/health, and finally survival sundries. So let's just go through these just real briefly so you have an understanding of what each one is and what it encompasses. And then we're going to apply these to your home. And you're going to see how all of that works together. At the very end, before my time is up, I'm going to show you how these categories apply to a bug out bag or emergency kit, get home bag. I mean, there are a million words, different terms for that. But I'm going to show you how this applies not just to your home, but also to something like a bug out bag. So let's get started with sanitation. So here under sanitation, this category is just anything that has to do with keeping your home base or your vehicle, your workplace.
I hate to interrupt. Can you share your screen? Can you show us the presentation?
Are you not seeing it? Are you seeing my notes?
We're not seeing anything.
Oh my goodness. I thought I had shared it. There we go. There we go.
There, okay, there we go.
Are we there? Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, interrupt me anytime. And now I see people asking about my screen. Let me go back just really quickly. There are all the 8 S's. Sanitation, sustenance, sanity. That was a rookie mistake. It's sad to say I'm not a rookie. Shelter, security, seasonal, strength, health, and survival sundries. So I'm going to start right here with sanitation. And this just encompasses anything that you want to have on hand or in a kit or a bag that is going to keep your surroundings clean and sanitary. So here we would have things like a plan for your laundry. What do you do when there's power outage with your laundry? What do you do when the water stops running? There's a boil notice. What about bathing and just general keeping things clean? So what might you want to have? And I have a couple of scenarios here on this slide. The next one is sustenance. And when we talk about sustenance, this is going to be what you have at home, food that can be stored at room temperature, and very, very simple meals. One thing that we learned during the pandemic quarantine is that I got a lot of emails from people and comments. All of a sudden, as a family, as a couple, even as a single person, they were making 3 meals a day and snacks, and everything had to be made there at home. Pretty much restaurants were closed, fast food places were closed, and they realized there is a lot to making 3 meals a day. My kids aren't getting lunches at school, maybe breakfast at school anymore. I'm in charge of all of these meals. I have to make sure we have everything on hand. And in a crisis, in an emergency, you want this to be one of the simplest things that you do. You don't want to labor when all, hell is breaking loose and, the kids are in a panic and you're trying to make decisions on the fly. Let's say there's, floodwaters, encroaching on your home and your neighborhood. What do we do? Where do we go? That's the last time where you want to have to be making some kind of involved meal. So we'll talk about simple meals, but when we talk about sustenance, it's very, very simple things. The third category is sanity, if you're taking notes. And again, one thing the pandemic taught us is that our modern day lifestyle, Professor Jacobson referred to this, it is more fragile than we realize. And isolation was something that I think very few survival types or prepper types had really given a whole lot of thought to. And yet in many households and within many individuals, that is what hit home the hardest. Cases of depression and severe loneliness. I have a membership for women, Survival Mom Sisterhood, and we met on Zoom group calls way more often, 6, 7, 8 times every single month, just so as a group we could form friendships and we could reassure each other, you're not alone. And so sanity is just thinking, what would I need to have on hand? Plans in place, supplies in place to kind of keep us focused, kind of keep us mentally and emotionally balanced. The next category is shelter. Your primary shelter is your home. So in an emergency, this category is going to encompass ways to handle cold temperatures, hot temperatures, power outages, and even decluttering. When I very first got into prepping, I was really surprised at how and why just organization was so essential. I mean, imagine trying, your hallway is filling up with smoke and you don't see flames yet, but you've got to get people out of the house, but you don't know where things are. You don't, and you're scrambling just to get out, much less saying, well, I want to get this kid. There's no plan in place. You're climbing over dirty laundry. So decluttering and organization are a surprising component of really readying your home place. Next is security. And no matter where you are or how you're applying the system, whether you're in a vehicle that is broken down, or maybe you're in one of these situations where a mob has shut down a highway and all of a sudden it's you, or maybe you and your children or grandkids in your car. Is there anything that you can do just to make security, just to feel more safe? And the bottom line is, no matter where you are or how you're applying this, it boils down to this: in what locations, in what scenarios do you feel vulnerable? Do you feel vulnerable when you get out of your car at night and there's a big area with no lighting? Is that when you might feel a little bit vulnerable? Or maybe when you're walking out, your hands are full, you're holding on to the hand of a grandkid and you're trying to fumble everything and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm out here in a parking lot. It's just me at night. I really am vulnerable. And take note of those kinds of situations, those scenarios, and then begin to think, well, then what can I do? What can I have with me? Sometimes it's as simple as just having a lighting source, for example. Seasonal is going to be number 6 on our list of the 8 S's. And this is just thinking ahead of time to the next season. Summer, winter weather, it's going to require adapting a little bit. So adapting what you carry in your vehicle, for example, adapting what you might have at home, thinking ahead. So now we're starting to think, well, fall and winter are coming. Do you live in a place where you're expecting extremely high fuel costs this winter? What could you do now to prepare for that possibility? Number 7 is strength, health, first aid. And this is one of your primary preps. I think it's also one that is greatly overlooked because honestly, it is so much easier to take out a credit card and buy 6 months of freeze-dried food, or go to a grocery store and fill 2 or 3 carts with canned food, than it is to get on the treadmill or to make that appointment for your annual physical or to take care of a dentist ailment or something like that. This can really make or break any kind of scenario for you. And as I said, it's often overlooked. we'll touch on this a little bit later. And then finally, just a category as a catch-all, I just call it survival sundries. And this is just things to have on hand that are so multi-purpose, they really don't go into any one category. And a lot of times these show up on survival must-have lists online, and you'll see a lot of them. So by all means, you know, the multi-tool is great, you know, the knife is great, the big roll of duct tape is great, but those just kind of fall into a category where you may use them for many different scenarios. And they will definitely find a place in your emergency kit in your car, as well as that bug out bag. Now, since your home is your primary survival location, we're going to tonight apply this 8 category system to your home. Although, as I've mentioned, it has many, many other applications. And speaking of which, with this new school year starting, kids are going to be going off to school and college. You might start thinking about these 8 S's and how you might equip your child's backpack or your college age kid or grandkid. When my daughter went off to college, she was 3 hours away, and we made sure that she was equipped for everything. That girl knew just what to do. In fact, when the big freeze hit Texas, she knew to keep her water running, and she knew a lot of different things to avoid freezes. Her apartment didn't freeze. A lot of others in the unit did. But nevertheless, she had learned and she had some supplies. So if you're thinking, my goodness, my college age kid is going to be out there all alone for the first time, apply the 8 S's to his or her scenario also. Now, I mentioned that your home is the very best place to focus on. And I know that in prepping and survival circles, there's a lot of talk about bugging out, having a bug out location in the wilderness somewhere. That can all be fine and good, but the truth is your home will almost always be the best location for you. And why is that? Well, first of all of your preps are going to be there. And if you have a second location, whether it's a vacation home or a bug out location that you have specific for that purpose, you will also have to prepare and stock that location as well, and then secure that location. Not trying to talk you out of that, but your home right where you are now is really just the primary place to focus on with your prepping. You know your home inside and out. You know where the best place to be if there's a hurricane or a big storm. You know how to get out of each room in case there's a fire. And your home is comforting. I mean, imagine having to, especially if you had a handicapped loved one, imagine having to rush them out of a house to a very strange location. They don't know where anything is. And now you're going to have to try to survive there. Much better to focus on your home first. And maybe that other scenario can happen later. And frankly, you know your neighbors. You know who to avoid. You know who your friends are, who the friendlies are. You know your neighborhood. You know safe routes in and out. You know unsafe areas. It really is the best place to focus on. And once you leave your home, you're a refugee until you arrive at another safe location. Now, when might you leave your home? And I'm going to just kind of do a real quick little rabbit trail here. When might you leave your home? If it's not structurally safe, in case there's an earthquake, if you have a few inches of water in your home, it's no longer safe. If crime has become so threatening that you feel like we can't even stay in our home or our neighborhood anymore, that's a reason to leave. Encroaching violence, encroaching riots, those are all very valid reasons to leave. And in that case, you'll need to have an evacuation plan, and that's another topic. So when we talk about applying the 8 S's to the home base, let's take a look first of all at sanitation. A few suggestions up here on this slide. And really, in more types of emergencies than you would ever expect, water becomes a major issue. My town was so flooded by Hurricane Harvey. I live in Southeast Texas, and there was a dam where water was allowed to be massive amounts of water in the middle of the night. And I will never remember having our radio tuned to a local station, and we heard one of these emergency rescue organizations say, if you live in this town, you need to get up on your roof and start waving a white t-shirt. Scared the crap out of me. I mean, I never thought, that's the kind of thing, right? That you never think would happen to you. You know, we saw this, the flooding in Katrina and Harvey and other events like that. But yes, it was happening like 2 miles from my house. So then following that, people were in need of water. And we would drive around and we would deliver cases of water bottles. We would deliver bags of ice. Water was the number one issue. They could wait for a sandwich, honestly. But what they couldn't wait for in the tail end of August and the first part of September, temperatures were getting hot, was water. So boil notices, broken water lines inside your house or outside in the neighborhood, floods and freezes. And before you know it, you're standing in line to buy cases of water. So don't let that be you. So in your home, a few things you can do. You do want to have some stored water, and both for events like I mentioned, as well as for traveling. So when we go on a road trip, I just grab a case of water bottles, put it in the back of the car, and away we go. Cases of water, you can typically buy them for less than $3. Watch for those sales, and then buy 3 or 4 or 5 of them and have them on hand. Keep them inside the house. They store well under beds or in the bottom of closets. There's a rule of thumb that says store 1 gallon of water per person per day. And I challenge you to do that. I challenge you to take a 1 gallon container and carry it around with you all day. And when you're thirsty, when you brush your teeth, when you wash your face, if you're going to try to take a little spit bath, as my mother used to call it, only rely on that 1 gallon of water and see how far you go. It's extremely difficult. So go ahead and err on the side of having too much, which would be 2 gallons of water per person per day. And, you know, start out by planning for 7 days. So if it's just you at home, you're going to need 14 gallons. And just take 14 times however many people are in your household. And that's how much water you ultimately need. To this day, I refill 2-liter soda bottles. I rinse them out really well. I wash the cap, or I run the cap through the dishwasher, and I just fill it with water from the tap. And by the way, water comes chlorinated from the municipal water supply. So there's no need to add more chlorine. Buy a few 5-gallon bottles and store those someplace. And then this is one thing I would recommend if you have a space. You know those big, huge blue drums? They use them in rodeos when they're going to have the barrel race, right? Well, ranchers, farmers, they're not spending $60, $70 per 55-gallon barrel or drum. And you can probably find them and source them through Craigslist. So just do a search online, use 55-gallon water barrel, use 55-gallon drum, make sure that nothing was ever stored in it other than food. So the ones that I purchased in Phoenix years ago, they were all stamped soy sauce. And so all we did was just rinse the inside out and refill them with water. So those hold 55 gallons. And then still going on about water. The Berkey water filter is considered to be the best, but in recent years, other companies have come along that are manufacturing filters very similar to the Berkey. You definitely want a high quality water filter. So just in case there is some kind of if there's a boil notice, you can put the water through a Berkey along with, boiling it and then letting it cool. It takes time. It takes time to bring it to a boil, and then it takes electricity or fuel to, maintain that boil for a while. But nevertheless, do have a way to purify your water. And this is kind of in the sanitation category. And tonight, when I talk about having extras, you want to make sure that whether it's toilet paper, cleaning supplies, toiletries, personal hygiene things, they all fall in this category. Make sure you're setting them aside where it doesn't just become an in-home convenience store. Otherwise, you're going to start using up that extra. And when the time comes that when you actually need that extra tube of toothpaste or that extra, package of toilet paper, we used it last week. So set it aside someplace where it actually is going to be set aside for emergencies. The next S to apply to your home base is sustenance. And I mentioned earlier about how the quarantine, people were having to make, every single meal at home and trying to figure out, how can we do this? Of course, that's how our grandmothers, our great-grandmothers, generations before us, men and women, that is just, what they had to do, along with growing everything and then going out and hunting. So we actually had it pretty easy, but it still was a wake-up call for a lot of people. And what you want in this category are about 30 days. Go for 30 days. You may have to just start with just 3 days. 3 days of extra food. 7 days of extra food, and then stretch that. Just repeat the meals over and over and over again until you have 30 days. And I do emphasize 30 days of very easy meals. Put it in writing, make a list of, what you're buying and what you have. You want to make sure. One day I went out to our pantry and I counted up something like, I don't even know, 17 or 20 cans of freeze-dried bananas. And I thought, no, pineapple. And I thought, how did it come to this? How did we ever end up with all these massive cans of freeze-dried pineapple? That's what happens when you're not keeping track. And so you want to make sure that if you're buying pasta, that you're buying enough jars of marinara, or you're buying enough of the ingredients to make your own marinara sauce, whatever the case may be. So you want to make sure that you have it written on paper so you know, what else do I need? And you'll get to a point where you can look at that extra and say, we're good. I don't have to worry about going out to the grocery store. If there was some other pandemic, if there was something else that kept us at home, I don't have to worry about going out of the house. And if there are empty store shelves, that doesn't affect me right now, because I have basically shopped 1 month, at least 1 month in advance with my food storage. And by the way, with prices rising, you will probably spend less now than you might in another few months. So go ahead and make your list now. And by the way, when I talk about easy and shelf life, I'm talking about things like chili over rice. My family loves that. Super cheap, super easy. Macaroni and cheese, cans of ravioli, cans of tuna or chicken. So you can just keep it very easy. And if you're like me, you probably eat maybe low carb or keto, or you have some other really healthy eating regimen. Take a look at what you're eating on keto or low carb, or whatever your eating plan is. Take a look at it and then just start making a list. Okay, this keto meal, I could really do this with a can of chicken and some olive oil. I could actually mix up something really tasty with that, and then focus on that. So don't get hung up just because the Survival Mom lady says macaroni and cheese or pasta. That's all fine and good, but if you're eating a certain way, especially if you have food allergies or there are food sensitivities in the family, that has to be your priority. Real quick, what about, it's not on the slide, what about freeze-dried meals and freeze-dried food? Big topic. I actually have 2 or 3 YouTube videos on the subject of freeze-dried meals. And my YouTube channel, I don't do much with YouTube, but it's under my name, Lisa Bedford. And so if you really, I go into more depth with freeze-dried food. The advantage of freeze-dried food, honestly, is that for the meals, like lasagna in a pouch or a can, you add hot water, you let it sit for a few minutes, and boom, you have a meal. That's a big advantage. All you need to make sure of is that you have some kind of an off-grid cooking method to heat up that water, right, in case there's a power outage. And I'll get to that in just a moment. But also make sure you try things out first. So you don't want to end up with a case of number 10 cans of Mountain House beef stew with vegetables, only to discover that you just really can't stand it. It's going to take a lot of work to doctor that up so it's palatable. Read the ingredients so you know what you're getting. And then keep in mind, these are for emergencies. You're only going to be eating them for a limited time. So there may be something in it you're not crazy about, but I may just eat this meal for 1 or 2 days. Oh, real quick, they're very lightweight. That's a huge advantage. So if you get a 5-gallon bucket, and if you can put in, a number of these meals in freeze-dried meals in pouches, for example, I think that the average size person could take 3 of those buckets on each arm and then carry them out to put in the car. They're that lightweight, and that's a big advantage. Real quickly, the off-grid cooking methods. This is what I recommend. I recommend 2 things. One is some kind of solar cooker. You want to make sure that it has the capability of heating up to a temperature that's actually going to cook your food, right? So you want your food to be heated up to a point, beyond whatever the temperature is for safety reasons. You don't want to sit out there in the sun and then bacteria starts growing. I like the sun oven. I've used a couple of others, but I come back to the sun oven again and again. But the reason I recommend something solar is because there's no fuel necessary. If you look at some other options, you think about a camp stove. You're going to need, propane or butane. An outdoor grill, you're going to need maybe some firewood, or you're going to need charcoal. So the solar oven, all you need is the sun. The second one I recommend, highly recommend, is a rocket stove. And a rocket stove, you can buy them on Amazon. They come in lots of different sizes. The advantage these have is that they are extremely fuel efficient. You could cook a meal with just a few twigs. And that actually is a huge advantage. Moving on to our next S, and this is sanity, is easily overlooked, as I mentioned, but maintaining sanity and a healthy mindset can't be overlooked. So at home, a couple of things, and you can have these in place now, or you can put them in writing to have them ready to go if there's ever some big crisis where everyone just has to, be at home for a lengthy period of time. Routines. This actually is big, and I'm going to tell you why. The more decisions you have to make in a crisis, what do we need? We don't have heat, we don't have light, the kids are crying, everybody's hungry, and you're making these decisions on the fly. The more decisions that you make under pressure like that, the more likely it is that you're going to do more harm than good with your decisions. It is really difficult to make important decisions or even small decisions under some intense pressure. And if you go hour after hour and day after day after day like that, you're going to be so grateful that you have things like household routines written down on paper. So in the morning, everybody in the family, including you, this is, you have these 5, 6, 7 things you do every morning. And this is your nighttime routine. This is your middle of the day routine. It just gives structure. And at the same time, while you're doing this, you're maintaining things like household chores. And who's going to prepare a meal? Who's going to clean up after a meal? Who's going to take care of the little ones, etc. And then a schedule. Same thing, a schedule. This can take chaos and put it back into order in a time of fear and panic. And so maybe you have your meals all scheduled out for the next 30 days. Just what you're going to be cooking, everybody knows. Monday, it's going to be, chili and rice night, for example. Or every Friday, we have baked oatmeal with canned peaches. Your schedule could be with homeschooling. These are the hours that we school, we take a break, we have nap time, mom reads to everybody, from 1 until 1:30. A schedule can do wonders. And again, having it in place, the decisions are already made. Then you just go back to your written plans when a crisis hits. And then also on the slide I have listed there, privacy and quiet time. Everybody's in the house. There's no way to get away from anybody. Privacy and quiet time. I remember a story about Johann Bach's wife. They had 1 trillion children. And for quiet time, she would lift up her apron and just put it over her head. And that was her quiet time. And that's when she would pray. I presume that's also, the kids have been warned. Stay away from mom when she has her apron over her head. Everybody needs some privacy. Everybody needs some quiet time. So build that into your schedule. And then a couple more tips here. Think about what might bring some comfort, might be distracting. With the quarantine, kids didn't know what was going on with school. Things were changing so rapidly. I know you remember that. So maybe have supplies on hands for, some hobbies. It would be a great time for kids to learn something like how to knit or how to garden. Distraction for the entire family or your entire group. Read alouds, a book on Audible, music. People learning how to play musical instruments, mental and spiritual health, and a way to express yourself through art or through a journal, a bullet journal. So you can do artwork and you can, make notes on whatever you're thinking. But this is something that's overlooked, and yet in a make or break situation, just having some of these sanity components built in really can bring your whole entire plan into better balance. Shelter. When we talk about shelter, again, the primary concern is that your shelter is ready for power outages. It is ready for extreme temperatures. It really is a safe and secure place for the family. So here I have extreme temperatures. I don't know about climate change. I have read so much on all sides of that argument, but it doesn't matter, because what I know is that yesterday in Phoenix, they had a massive summer thunderstorm that took out power and that actually blew down, some big structures. And here we've had one of the hottest Julys, in this part of Texas in history, as far as, recorded history. But I don't know about climate change, but I do know that climate changes. And so you may have an unseasonably cold winter. I mean, where I live, I have screenshots of my weather app showing that it was 12 degrees where we live. Whoever thought that? We're about 30, 40 minutes northeast of Houston. Whoever thought that we would have day after day after day in the teens and with no power? That was an exciting time. So you want to keep in mind, maybe you live in an area that doesn't really get super hot or super cold. You don't really get snow typically. Still kind of be thinking along those lines, what if? Lighting is extremely important, not only just for shelter, coziness. Everyone just, you can see what you're doing. Otherwise, you have to wake up when the sun comes up and you have to go to sleep when the sun goes down. So lighting helps a great deal with that and extends those hours. But solar lanterns are inexpensive. I love, by the way, the Lucy light, L-U-C-I, the Lucy light. It comes in a lot of different variations. And so you can check those out on Amazon or many different websites. And I actually have a review of the Lucy light on my blog. LED flashlights along with extra batteries. I'm a battery saving maniac. I can't pass up a good bargain on batteries. And then keeping cool in the summer might just be having battery powered fans. And by the way, it can also mean knowing when it's time to get out. So in a heat wave, babies and toddlers, you see how red they get when it's hot or they've been playing too rambunctiously, right? Their bodies do not cool down the way ours do. All right, they will in time. But babies and toddlers, it may be a very unsafe situation if you don't have a way to keep them cool enough where their body temperature remains at a normal level. You may actually have to just get out. And that is where having an evacuation plan might come into play. And same with the wintertime. You just know when it gets so cold and it doesn't look like it's going to let up. Know when it's time to get to safety. It might just be the neighbor's house across the street. Staying warm enough in the winter, it could be having a tent and keeping a tent inside. And that's where you stay when you want to warm up. And by the way, that's where you bring your pets. All right. 3-dog night. You might be wishing you had 3 dogs in the time of a major freeze and a power outage. So your home also finally probably needs to be decluttered and organized. Running around and trying to find emergency supplies in an emergency, and the laundry's there, you have, piles of, papers and mail everywhere. It really is time to get decluttered. And fortunately, that's something you can do just one shelf at a time, one drawer at a time. An emergency is the worst time in the world to start looking for a flashlight. We're on to the security component here. And that is, speaking of lighting, it could be checking your home's outdoor lighting and motion lights. That's an inexpensive fix, as well as automatic timers in your home. Your lights come on at a certain time, they go off. The TV or a radio, just to give the appearance of someone being at home. And security is home security, it's personal security, but it's also layers. It's not just having a home security system. It isn't just having a dog or 3 dogs. It really is having different kinds of layers and things that might deter or actually just prevent someone from even taking a second look at your house. And one of those things, believe it or not, you can put in place, and it is just a visual deterrence. The next time you're walking around your neighborhood or driving around any neighborhood, look for a home that is really unkept. It is just a mess. And then maybe the windows have a newspaper on them, or they're all closed and it doesn't look like anybody's home. It doesn't look like anybody cares. That is a home that is more vulnerable to someone who wants to steal something, that wants to break in, than a home that maybe has shrubs out front. And it almost creates like a visual fence, even if they're just plants, right? And the landscaping is kept up. And maybe the windows are open and it looks like someone's home. It looks like someone is there all the time. Something as simple as just a visual deterrence can make a lot of difference. Seasonal. Again, think about your home base and how to get it prepared for the next season. It could be stocking up now on firewood and kindling. It could be getting the chimney all clean and inspected. Maybe you need to have some sunscreen and mosquito repellent and some battery operated fans. Always just be thinking about the coming season and how you might prepare for it. And finally, survival sundries. This is, oh, did I miss one? Strength? Oh, I did. I missed strength. Sorry about that. Strength, health, and first aid. This might be as easy as making an appointment for a physical or a medical or a dental appointment ahead of time and not ignoring symptoms. So again, this is an area that's very overlooked. It's easier to buy stuff, right, than it is to just kind of pay attention to your physical body a lot of times. So make a list of prescriptions and over-the-counter medications that you typically use. When I saw the symptoms that were most prevalent for COVID, all right, a couple of years ago now, I went to CVS and I bought over-the-counter medications to address each one of those symptoms. So I bought something for coughs, I bought something for fevers and stuffy noses, etc. And I made sure I had at least one package per person. So we have 4 people in my household. So I bought 4 bottles of Mucinex, and I made sure we had 4 bottles of Dayquil or NyQuil, whatever the case may be. So, think about just the typical, when your family gets sick, what are the symptoms and what do you usually do? And then if at all possible, try to have 30 days extra, even of prescription medications. Survival sundries, the last S. These are things that a lot of times, as I mentioned, you find on prepper and survival lists. But before you go out and just start checking off the list, make sure they make sense to you. All right. So you may not need a big, huge, hunting knife. So for you, maybe something smaller, a pocket knife, or a folding knife that you can keep in your purse or in your car's glove box, for example. Years ago, when I first got into this, I went to a website written by a man, and I had read a lot of his writings. I really respected him. And he had a list of these things. And I'll never forget taking my little son, and we went to Walgreens, not Walgreens, Walmart. And we went to the hunting section, and I bought fish hooks. I bought fishing weights. I bought fishing line. I bought whatever that man told me to buy, I bought. And I lived in Phoenix at the time. There are virtually no bodies of water with fish. And in a crisis, those fish are going to be gone in a second. And yet I drove around for years with my emergency fishing supply with me, just in case. So don't do what I did. Make sure that these supplies make complete sense to you. All right. Otherwise, you're just wasting money. So I told you that I would show you really quickly how to apply the 8 S's to a bug out bag. Super simple. And actually, I'm kind of winding down. I'm getting to the end of my notes in my last slide here. So in a bag like this, honestly, it could be any kind of a bag. It could be a backpack. It could be a diaper bag. I mean, if you're a mom with a baby, you could tuck some of these supplies, somewhere in an extra pocket. But sanitation, well, you know something now about sanitation. Maybe this is where you put in some Kleenex, a little bottle of Purell hand sanitizer, or a bar of soap in a case. And by the way, a bar of soap is so versatile. You can wash hair with it. You can do laundry with it. I really like a bar of soap in a kit like this. And a package of Clorox wipes. So think about, we've applied the category of sanitation to an emergency kit or a bug out bag. Sustenance, some energy bars, packets of Gatorade mix, emergency packets, for the ultra vitamin C drink. Some hard candies, make sure nothing that contains chocolate, of course, if you're going into warm weather. Sanity, honestly, it could be some earplugs. It could be a little book. It could be a Kindle, kind of depending on, where you are. I would also recommend, and I didn't list it here, make sure you have a external battery pack. A brand like Anker, A-N-K-E-R, go on Amazon and always have one of those along with a charging cord for your phone. I know that sometimes professional survivalists, and that would not be me, sometimes they scoff at technology, but your cell phone could be a lifeline. And if the battery is going dead and you're off someplace and you're away from your car, you have nowhere to charge it, well, you're going to be so grateful that you have that external battery pack or that battery charger. Okay, highly recommended. It's worth every penny. So real quickly then, under shelter, it could be maybe a tarp, a solar lantern, a battery powered fan. Security, under that category, it could be flashlight, it could be pepper spray, whatever you feel comfortable carrying and using to provide some security. And honestly, sometimes security can just be a light, you know, so it shows this, you know, this is my space. Seasonal, again, hand warmers, insect repellents, sunscreen. You'll want to change those things out, usually starting about April, you know, for warm weather, and September for cold weather, thereabouts. Strength and health, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, a few days worth of prescription medications, some first aid supplies. Survival sundries, a little roll of duct tape, paracord, a multi-tool, a knife. So think about that framework, those 8 S's, and you can apply those now to your kids' school backpack. Be mindful of the rules, be mindful of their age and their capabilities. College kids, as I mentioned, your vehicle emergency kit, you can apply the 8 S's to that. What to keep on the job, you know, if you're ever stranded at work. It may be even equipping your elderly parents or elderly loved ones. What might they want to have on hand in case of an emergency? So that is the framework of the 8 S's. You can apply them in lots of different scenarios. And I hope that you've picked up some tips. If you've been taking notes, you know, I hope that you'll come back to those and start using your notes as a checklist to get everything done. Over at the survivalmom.com/academy, you can see other courses that I have, online courses. I have freebies, different kinds of printables. There's a Facebook group. It's called Survival Mom Bootcamp. And I sometimes have challenges. We're getting ready for a challenge in September, Build Your Best Ever Emergency Kit, coming in September. And I send out a weekly newsletter every Sunday. So I'm going to turn this over to Kimberly. I want to thank you for your time. I'm here to answer questions. And I just appreciate being invited by Legal Insurrection and Professor Jacobson.
Yes, thank you so much, Lisa. That was fantastic. And I want to go ahead and get everyone an opportunity who has a question. If you'll put that in the Q&A section. One of the things that that Lisa touches on in her book, I don't want to give too much away because I highly encourage it. And it is a very interactive book that you can use. You can make lists. Much of the information she discussed is actually in that book, and so much more. But one of the things she discusses too, and it's something we've implemented in our home, is learning skills. And so this ended up being kind of an accidental thing where we have started making a lot of our own food. Part of it was because I got sick of picking up things at the grocery store, not being able to pronounce half of what was in there. And so kind of following that track, we now make many of our own things. We make our own bread, we make our own yogurt, we make our own granola bars and our gummies, whatever baked goods that we want. The kids love to get in the kitchen and help. Cheeses and things of that nature are kind of on we're learning about those and how to make those. You know, we've ventured out a lot because, as Professor Jacobson mentioned, over the last couple of years, we've realized just how fragile modernity has made us. And that's not the way even 2 generations removed, my grandparents and even my parents when they were younger, that's not the way they grew up. They knew how to grow. They knew how to do all of the things that now we rely on other people to do. And so it's just been a great experience to get the kids involved in that. We have a garden. We've learned so much about that. We have too many chickens. Which is something Professor Jacobson teases me about because I didn't quite do the egg math there. So we've kind of inadvertently created our own little egg farm, which will be, again, great learning for the kids as we move forward. And we have some other animals. And I think the next stop on that path is going to be something that renders milk. So we can take the raw milk and make delicious things out of that. But it's just keeping it very simple. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, it can be so easy to get overwhelmed. There's a billion different gadgets. There's a billion different things you can buy. One of the things that we've gotten into, and my daughter absolutely loves, is Little House on the Prairie and Laura Ingalls, right? And so watching things like that and reading those books, there is a simplicity that I think we try to overcomplicate a lot of things when it comes to preparedness, when it comes to preparing food or even canning food in advance. But one of the biggest thing I can share is just to have a plan. Have a plan. And I know Lisa touches on that in every part of what she teaches too. It's being prepared and having a plan and thinking things through is kind of the first step. You know, what are you going to do if things turn south again, or if there's a major supply chain meltdown? And so if you just start thinking in those terms, it becomes very easy to kind of put these pieces together. And so I'm going to give just another couple minutes, say just a couple minutes. I think Professor Jacobson had a couple things he wanted to share, and then I'm going to get to your questions before we wrap up.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good. One of the things you focused on is one of the things that I worry about most, and that's the water, okay? That I think people totally underestimate how much water they need and how to keep it. What do you think about, and you mentioned the 55-gallon things. One of the things I've seen and thought about is they have more modular sort of things. So, you know, essentially 5-gallon containers that stack, but like water preservation. I have no idea. I see all these things you can put drops in the water and things like that. You know, what's your thinking on, you know, storage of water? And the other problem that I have is, you know, the filtering situation, that where are you going to get the water from to filter if your municipal water goes down? And we live on a brackish river, and a lot of those filters like the Berkey will not work with brackish or salt water. So if you could just speak a little bit more to the water situation, because that's what, you know, it's easy to buy 30 days worth of food. That's right. Easy. Okay. Yeah. It's the water that really worries me.
Yeah. I think that you need to approach that from a couple of different angles. One is to store the water. So in my home, we have 155-gallon drum per person. So we have 4 of them. And we have a pump that, if necessary, we just attach it to the opening and we can pump out the water. So the one is to kind of assess realistically how much you can store where you live. And then also consider, can you set up a water catchment system? Those actually can be as easy as having a tarp ready to go and then having it funnel the water down into some container. That's what, that would be my recommendation, because the water that, you know, you might get from a local source. And what I always say is, whenever you have water, or, you know, if you have some running water, there's always something upstream. You don't know what's upstream, right? I mean, it could be a dead animal upstream somewhere, and now you are getting, you know, the water that has just, you know, been a part of that, and now it's, you know, it's running by your house. So consider a larger amount of water stored, and then consider water catchment. That would be primarily what I would suggest. And then having backups, because the Berkey is great, as well as some very similar products. I mean, there's Alexapure, there's ProPure, there's similar filters, but also bleach, having a system for boiling water. The Red Cross, their official water purification process is combining boiling with bleach. So they actually do both in order for, you know, to meet Red Cross standards. So I would have 3 or 4 of those kind of ready to go. Unfortunately, they're all really simple to do.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. So I think I'm going to go ahead and go down through some of our questions right now. There have been quite a few questions actually about money. Mm-hmm. And I realize this is all speculative because we have no clue, you know, if the world falls apart, what that looks like, right? Yeah. You know, are we now in a bartering economy? Does cash work? So there's just a handful of questions all kind of pertaining to what your advice is on preparing monetarily. Mm-hmm. Or
those are all
exchange or
those
something.
are all really good questions. And I want to first of all just put this out there, and that is that a lot of the scenarios that run through our minds come from prepper fiction. They just do. And not you know, it's not very much unlike romance novels trying to, you know, they put in our head the way a romance is going to turn out, right? You just bump into, a billionaire, while you're running to get out of the rain. So prepper fiction and survival fiction, it's all well and good. It's for entertainment purposes, but please just, read it, take what you can out of it, but then also realize that it was written to entertain you. It really was. It was written to entertain you first and foremost. So having said that, silver and gold, people talk about that. Let me back up just a little bit. Remember that the knowledge you have and the skills you have are worth something to someone. I once had someone, it was a woman well into her late 70s, and she says, Lisa, no survival group on earth is going to want me. I'm not strong enough to garden. I'm not strong enough to go running after chickens. She said, but I know a lot about gardening. And she said, I have been trying to learn more and more and more and boost the skills that I have and learn new skills, because if nothing else, a group, a person might want me to be a part if I ever needed to find, seek refuge. Again, that's the realm of prepper fiction, but still, that has value. So I would pay more attention to what can you learn. Right now, we're in the late July. In most places around the country, here in the United States, you actually could still get a garden in the ground. Go ahead and experience the failures. Know what it's like, to pull
And
the
there will
weeds
be
and to figure
failures.
out the water. Do that. Learn the skills, because ultimately, in a truly bad scenario, the grid is down, or whatever scenario you want to imagine, your skills are going to see you through a whole lot farther than stocking up on little bottles of liquor from the liquor store. Okay. You can do that. You can do that. I've thought about it myself. But the skills, you could say, the bartering could be something as simple as, my husband is a master electrician. Hey, I'll come over and I'll, kind of get things connected. I'll hook up your generator for you. You have chickens. Why don't you give us a few dozen eggs? So I see that as just being a system that is just going to be, kind of neighbor to neighbor, people that what do you have, and doing a fair exchange. And this isn't part. As people are reading these questions, it's like, I just wish I had like a week, to go into a lot of these different specifics. But honestly, one of the best things you can do to prep right now, beyond what we've talked about, is forming relationships. Get to know your neighbors. If things hit the fan, your survival group are the people that live near you, like it or not. Find out, who you can trust. And by the way, the golden rule for me, as far as trustworthiness goes, would I trust that person alone with my kid or with my grandkid? If they can meet that very high bar, then we can work together at a very high level of trust. But it's good to know, your gut feeling. Who do you feel you can trust? Form relationships with people, have them over for dinner, meet for coffee. Because like we saw with the COVID pandemic, relationships really became very, very important. The isolation is what got to a lot of people. I got off the topic of money, gold and silver. And the person who mentioned the Forstchen book, read it years ago. It's fictional. Okay, it's fictional. A lot of people who were expecting an EMP to happen at any time, once they read 1 second after, the prepping that we did for that, some of it came in handy for the COVID quarantine months. But with the quarantine months, we had internet connection, we had power, we had phone, we had television, we had YouTube, and yet there were things that we weren't fully expecting that took us by surprise. I think someone else asked about finance. Do you remember that question, Kimberly? I really don't want to skip over a question if I go off on a tangent here.
I think I just zeroed it out, but let's see.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it was just asking about, monetarily, how do you prepare? Gold, silver, should you be prepared to barter?
Yeah, gold and silver, buying those, that can come later. That can come later. So it's not a bad or negative thing to buy gold and silver. That really, but are you going to do that before you have 30 days of food? Before you have 60 days of food? No. So the gold and silver, I don't know everybody's circumstances. You'll have to just decide yourself.
Well, and I think the point you made about relationships is just so crucial. We moved to a very small town, and so we're very fortunate to have an amazing community here, where I know I'm working with other moms planning for the fall. Who's going to plant what, right? What can we learn? What skills can we all learn so that we can get really good at the things that we're doing, and then someone else is really good at doing something else, and someone else is really good at doing something else, so we can pull all of those things, because we can't each do everything by ourselves. And I think that's one of the terrible things of modernity, is that we have been told that that's what you must do. You either pay someone to do it, or you have to do all of this by yourself and have all of this knowledge. And that's just not historically the way humans have thrived, nor have they lived. It takes everyone with a very particular set of skills, exercising those skills, sharing those skills, trading on those skills to make any small community work and thrive. So I think that's just such a good point, and it's something that's often overlooked. And so to that, there have been several questions about recommended skills. And if there anything, with preparedness in mind, that you would suggest being essential to knowing how to do.
Well, I talked about food storage, and kind of within the parameters of tonight's webinar, we really didn't get into other ways, because I'll never forget looking at my food storage back in Phoenix and realizing one of these days we will use the last jar of ragu. Then what do I do? So then you start thinking, what can I cook from scratch? You can bake bread from scratch, but what else can you make from scratch? That actually is huge, because individual ingredients that can be used over and over and over in all different kinds of recipes, that's actually going to be cheaper for you, much more versatile. And then you can use, you can make your homemade marinara, you can make your homemade soup, everything can be made homemade. So I would start with, just making more and more from scratch. Again, thinking about gardening. I live in a place, we have about 50 trees on our property. It is very difficult for me to grow much more than herbs. Even my cherry tomatoes, didn't even do anything for me this year. So think about what you can do. Hunting and fishing. Yes, learn those kinds of skills. But then around the house, what can you do what could you do if you could no longer get a pair of shoes? Could you fix that? Do you have the supplies for that? What if you had to take one piece of clothing and take it all apart and then put it back together in a smaller size? Do you have sewing skills for that? So be thinking about the practical things that you just use every day around the house. What if I couldn't get that anymore? What would I do? And so that's a starting point. I know on my blog, if you do a search for skills, it's going to come up with just dozens and dozens of articles, including I think a printable list there, making wine, herbalism.
Skill to have.
Yeah. Herbalism is another one.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. Thank you. And someone's asking how to store the 55-gallon drums if you live somewhere where it freezes.
Yeah. I would make sure that it has some headspace. If it does freeze, 55 gallons is huge. It's going to take a lot of very, freezing temperatures over many, many days. Not to say it's not possible. If you can put it somewhere where it's, sheltered, if you can put it in an outbuilding or something, make sure you have the headspace. You might even try putting some bales of straw around it. So we're beekeepers, and in really extreme cold temperatures, we would be prepared to put some bales of straw around our beehives. And so you could do the same with those big containers of water.
Excellent. And someone else is asking about your recommendations for backup electric power sources.
Yeah. Huge topic. Backup power sources. First of all, I have a course. It's a video course on generators, because depending on a household, you may not need a generator. You may not need the solar generator. Okay. It really just depends. And there are a lot of, health issues, age of the people there, where do you live, what kind of extreme temperatures are you expecting? But to be honest with you, the backup power source, there's only so many ways you can go with that are at a practical level for most, most homeowners. So Dave mentions here, learn to live without electricity. Some people can do that. If you have someone in the family that relies on medical equipment, you can't. So everybody's circumstances are just a little bit different. A portable generator that can run on different kinds of fuel, that would be a general recommendation. And you just decide, okay, we have to have the refrigerator going. We don't have to have, the air conditioning. We kind of depend. You add up the must-haves with what you need to have running. A television, not really. Lamps, lights in the evening time, maybe early in the morning. And maybe the portable generator is the way to go. A whole house generator is going to run you anywhere from about 15 to 20,000 or more, depending. Major investment. But again, my husband headed up a generator division for a big energy company, and a big percentage of the people that are buying them, they have family members who are vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
Medical equipment, they're very elderly. They literally cannot survive in extreme temperatures. That's a worthwhile investment. The solar generator, my husband will fight anybody over this. It's not a generator. It doesn't generate anything. It just stores energy. But everybody refers to it as a solar generator, so I just give in to the mob. The advantage of that is that you can keep it indoors. The generators that run on gasoline or whatever, they have to be kept outside. They're also vulnerable to theft. If someone really wanted to, with the loud noise they make, they sure give away their location, unless you chain it up really, really well. The solar generators, you can bring it inside. They're expensive. You just have to decide what level of investment you want to make with that. I like the small solar applications. Small solar panels that can, that would allow me to run, let's say, a crock pot, something small, so I can just take care of, small things like that around the house.
Which can be used for so many things. I mean,
Yeah.
Once you go down this rabbit hole, the things that you can make on your own rather than purchasing them are infinite, and really all you need is a crock pot and cheesecloth. It's amazing what you can do with a crock pot and cheesecloth. This is a really interesting question too. For people on a fixed income, they may not have a lot of, extra to purchase in the way that, someone with a little bit more extra might be able to. Do you have any recommendations for that particular scenario?
So prepping on a really tight budget where there's just like very little to no money. I would hang out at estate sales, thrift stores, Goodwill store, if there are things that you actually need to buy. I bought a food dehydrator off Craigslist for $30. Backpacks you can get. A lot of these kinds of things you can get at a discount, very huge discount through these different sources. Also, wherever you live, go to Facebook. Not a big fan of Facebook. I'm there, but I don't like it. But nevertheless, go to Facebook and look up the name of your town and then maybe a word like free. So in my town, I have 2 big boxes of stuff in my living room right now. I'm getting ready to give away for free on this group. And so see if there is a group, a Facebook group, where you can just get things for free. You can just, say, I need a backpack. Does anybody have a food dehydrator? A lot of these things were kind of a fad, and someone gets, their seal a meal. They get their vacuum sealer and it never, I'm just going to give it away. I'm going to sell it for $10. So that's one thing that I would do. And then also, you may not have the money to buy a whole lot, but remember at the beginning of the webinar, I said, make 3 lists. Only one of them was to do, or only one of them was to buy. There was one to do and there was one to learn. So really focus on what can you do? What can you learn that will help you just be more prepared overall? It's not, focusing on buying is it's not a good strategy for anybody, even if you have the money.
No, I completely agree. And having a plan, because I know when I first started looking at all of this, the compulsion was, oh my gosh, I need to go buy, X number of meals and, do all of this. And then I'm going, all right, hang on. There has to be a better way to do this. And, I'm a planner. And so I took a couple steps back, and that's kind of how I found you. And it's been tremendously helpful to kind of, to have a blueprint for how to do this without it being overwhelming. There are a lot of questions about water preservation. I don't know if you want to talk any more about that, or if that's something we could refer people to your other resources, because in her book there's an entire chapter on, and I believe there's an entire chapter on water. Yeah, and how to preserve water, store water, and everything you could possibly want to know about water.
Yeah.
So I'll leave that up to you if that's something you.
Yeah, I have an online course, just coincidentally. I didn't know that water was going to be a big topic. Just today, I updated an online course called Survival Begins with Water. With everything, think about layers. The simplest thing to do is just get a half-gallon bottle of bleach and an eyedropper. And there are instructions online how many drops of water you need for, a gallon of water to purify whatever. Boiling the water is another layer. So if you're thinking in an emergency power outage, I need to boil water. That's kind of a slightly extreme scenario. No power to boil your water, no other way to purify it, and yet you have to purify it. So now what do? That's a good exercise, a good mental exercise. So you might want to think, well, now I need to have a way to boil the water, an off-grid method that's going to get that water up to the boiling point. What is that going to be? Am I going to put it out on the grill? Am I going to, put it out in a solar oven and then, check the temperature to make sure it gets to at least the point of pasteurization? So it really is all about just having layers, because bleach may not be the answer all the time. And by the way, bleach has a shelf life of about a year. Boiling may not be the answer all the time. So you want to have more than one way to do that. So life straw, I have mixed feelings about the life straw. The only thing it's really good for is you dunk that life straw in some water and you suck it up and you drink it. You can't, it doesn't filter out into a container where you could use it for cooking. And you can also distill water. Distilling water is time consuming. It requires not only a lot of time, it requires just the whole process. And distillation actually is a pretty slow process. You don't get a whole lot of water for the amount of time and the fuel expended, but yet that is another possibility.
And you lose a lot of the minerals that you find in regular rainwater too. They're distilled out. So, and there is, I think, we'll do this question and maybe one more, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up for the evening. And there's someone asking about a toilet in case of no water, and what would you do in that scenario?
Yeah, that happened to us when we had the big, huge Texas freeze. You know what, really, there are a couple different ways to do it is that you can pour water into the upper tank of a toilet, and that water can be swimming pool water, which, by the way, is not great for drinking, but that is one really good use for it. So Dr. Jacobson mentioned, getting the brackish water from the river. That would be one use for it. So if you think about it, Professor Jacobson, now that I'm getting back to you and your question, think about maybe water that really you wouldn't use for drinking, but you could use for flushing a toilet. Mm-hmm. You could use it for, watering a garden. It has other uses. You may want to just have water set aside specifically for the drinking because it's safe for that. So I walked away from your question, Kimberly. Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. It's just toilet options or all.
The toilet. The other option in a true emergency, is you just, everybody, we're going to go number one in this bucket that has a liner, and we're going to go number two in this bucket. And you can put sand, or you can put dirt, or you can sawdust or kitty litter, just to kind of soak things up, and, you just dispose of them as necessary. But yeah, everybody, pee, poop, and vomit. They're just all a fact of life.
And if you have small children, as I do,
at the same time, that's a good time to maybe check your, the disinfectants that you have. And going back to the category of sanitation, what else might you want to have on hand?
Well, that's great advice. I had no idea until reading your book that bleach had a shelf life. That was news to me.
Yes, I know. Even, okay, here's what you do. You get your half gallon of bleach, and the reason I say just a half, set it aside for water purification if needed. All right. If you don't need it, you're not going to waste a whole gallon after. Okay. With a Sharpie on the outside, write the day you buy it. And then on the outside, I have the instructions on my website and there are other websites, how many drops to purify how much water. Just write that on the outside with a Sharpie, and then, just tuck it away. At the end of that year, end of the 9 months to a year, whatever, you can always, what I would do, I'm going to do this next time. I'm going to take some very old bleach and I'm going to splash it on an old rag and just see if it bleaches out the color. I'm curious about that. You could still use it for laundry. You could pour it down to sanitize the kitchen drain.
Yeah, that's very helpful, as everything you've shared has been. And so our last question for this evening, how often should you replace food supplies when they outlive their shelf life? And how do you go about making sure that your stockpile is fresh?
Okay. First of all, the USDA does not have any official guidelines as to what is meant by the best buy date, or the sell by date. Okay. There are no guidelines. So they leave it up to food manufacturers just to put a date there. Okay. This is actually a big subject. I wrote an article recently for the Epic Times. If you want, it's on this subject. I think it's coming out this week. So food, as it gets very, very old, it can lose its nutrients. It can lose its taste, its flavor, its texture. Imagine mushy canned peaches, and you get an idea of what old food would be like. However, you really can extend the shelf life by a great amount of time by keeping food stored in the coolest place you possibly can. If you're fortunate enough to have a basement and you live where the weather is temperate to cold in the wintertime, chances are your basement probably never gets above 70, maybe never gets above 65. Ideal location for food. And your food can store there years longer than you might think. So if you just kind of get into a kind of what is called food rotation, where when you buy new peanut butter, you put the new peanut butter behind the old peanut butter, and then the next time you use peanut butter, you buy a jar that is the oldest one there. And that's just food rotation. But yes, storing it in the coolest place, the coldest place you can. In fact, it's surprising, the ideal food storage temperature is 40 to 60 degrees. It's really cold. If you can keep it at a 70, 75, and pretty much keep it always at that temperature, you're really going to do a lot for its shelf life.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you so much.
You're
This
welcome.
has been tremendously helpful. And like I said, was thrilled to have found you. I've learned so much and continue to learn, and just so appreciate all you're doing and how simple you've made all of this and stress-free for something that is somewhat stressful. And I want to thank everyone who was here this evening. We so appreciate you. And it's always what I like to encourage everyone is to know that I know we're living in very exciting and terrifying times, depending on how you want to look at it, probably both, but you're not alone. I do believe that there are so many people. We still have such a great sense of community and shared community in our country, not just where I live. I don't think that's unique here, because one thing I have witnessed, thankfully, all over our country is that when things get tough, people band together. And so you're not alone. There's no need to be afraid. Just be wise. Do what you can. Tackle these things one at a time. Reach out to people. This is a great opportunity to get to know people around you if you have not already done so. It's also good to know who to avoid, in the event things get kind of rough, whether it's temporarily or for a long while. So we appreciate y'all so much. We thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you on the internet. And if you do appreciate this programming, again, you can easily find our donate form. I think I dropped the link in a while ago, but it's way up at the top. You can donate on our website via our email and any other way. And again, thank you so much, Lisa. We so appreciate you and everything that you're doing, everything you've done. And thank you so much for joining us tonight and sharing your wealth of knowledge on this.
Yes, thank you also, Lisa. And I'm about to sign up for your water course. That's super important to me right now. But thank you. And everybody should visit her website and buy her books. And
Definitely buy
learn a
her
lot of
book.
good
Oh,
stuff.
buy her book. It's fantastic.
Great. Good night. Take care.
Good night, y'all. Take care.
Bye.